What was it?
Give them the railroads land so that they can sell it and put the railroads there.
You come up with big old story.
Oh, no, no.
Well, it's great to find people that are so knowledgeable already. Yeah, the Railroad Act said, if you build a railroad, we'll give you the odd numbered sections within 10 miles of the railroad track. That means they got half the land within 10 miles, right? Konza was within 10 miles. Well, that wasn't the only railroad, that was a Kansas Pacific. That wasn't the only railroad within 10 miles. The other one was called the Katy. What was the Katy? Kansas, MKT, Missouri, Kansas, Texas. And it ran from Junction City southward, which meant that, thank you very much. With two railroads within 10 miles, what do you give the second railroad if the first one gets the odd numbered section? So if you wanted land, you had to buy it from the railroad. There was one, well actually there are 4 instances on Konza where people didn't have to buy from the railroad. They got in first. There were almost 2 months between the Homestead Act and the Railroad Act. And for example, Amasa Huntress, I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, he was a Manhattan politician, and he homesteaded this quarter section before the railroads got their hands on it. But he didn't keep it very long. As soon as he proved up on it, he gave it away. So we have the railroads in control. Wes Dawkins came to work for Chauncey Dewey, but they didn't get along very well. Well, Chauncey was in the habit, for example, of, at the end of a season, he would rent a railroad car, Pullman, at Kansas City, and bring a carload, railroad carload of ladies from Kansas City to here for a party. The West Dawkins family were pretty puritanical, and they didn't go for that very much. Not only that, but West Dawkins built a bunch of concrete water tanks around the ranch, and old Chauncey wouldn't pay him for them. So West Dawkins said, that's enough of that. So he quit his job, moved his family, and for a few years there was just interim foreman living in that house. But then when Chauncey sweet talked West into coming back, that was in 1928. And remember what happened in 1930, the forced sale of the ranch. But West stayed on with the new owner. So the West Dawkins family have quite a history associated with Konza. The lady who lives out on South Manhattan, I talk to quite frequently. And she has given me a number of pictures. The Dawkins family were very close-knit. But like all families, they kind of tend to disappear. So West Dawkins then stayed until 1943, and then he moved his family, well, his family just kind of dispersed hither and thither. So that takes care of the Dawkins family. Another family that we need to talk about is the Hawkinson family. Anyone here related to the Hawkinsons? Or maybe you pronounce it Hawkinson, Hawkson. Because you'll find both spellings in a lot of documents. So I suspect they pronounce it Hawkinson rather than we pronounce it Hawkinson. Well, the Hawkinsons were three Swedish brothers who came here in the 1880s and settled on property right in here. Initially, well, the oldest Hawkinson brother was called Charles. Actually, he was called Carl. That was his given name. And the middle one was Johann, and the youngest one was Andrus. But wanting to be good Americans, they changed their names from Carl to Charles, from Johann to John, and from Andrus to Andrew. The older one was already married when they came here. They had stopped in Illinois for a while, and that's where Carl was married. Andrew, the youngest one, started buying property. And as you can see, the property that he bought was in a long, narrow strip. Any ideas why it would be in a long, narrow strip? That's where the creek ran. So he bought, his property was 1/4 of a mile wide and almost 2 miles long. He also bought 18 acres right in here. It's probably the best 18 acres on Konza. He didn't bother buying a quarter section or a 1/4 of a quarter section, that would be 40 acres. He just bought the piece he wanted, and that was 18 acres. So the Hawkinsons, Hawkinson, the middle brother married almost immediately after they settled down here. The initial house was built of stone, it was just a little stone rectangle. And when John got married and moved out towards Zendale, Carl got married, not Carl, but Andrew got married and started raising a family. Well, with a family, you needed more than just this little stone box to live in. So the farmhouse was built and completely surrounded, by the way, by the Dewey Ranch. There was no way that the Hawkinsons could get from their house out to the highway without going across Dewey property. The Hawkinson kids couldn't even get to school without going across Dewey property. Okay? But they persisted for 2 generations. Finally, Andrew gave up farming and moved into Manhattan, and his son, Carl, not his brother Carl, his son Carl, took over the farming operation. And he farmed it until 1948. 2 generations of the Hawkinsons lived there. That's the only homestead on Konza that has as much as 2 generations occupancy. So who did he sell it to? Well, back in 1930, when the sheriff's sale sold the property out from under old Chauncey Dewey, a fellow by the name of George Davis bought it. Have any of you heard of George Davis? If you had lived here back around 1920, 1930, 40, you probably would have heard of George Davis. He was quite a businessman. He had 6 ranches in the area, all of them having more than 20,000 acres. So he hired people to run his ranches for him, and people that he hired, Wes Dawkins was one, John O'Neill was the other. So Dawkins and O'Neill stayed on even after the Dewey Ranch was sold to Davis. Well, Davis kept the ranch until some date. My memory is getting to be too old for what I need it for. About 1943, was sold to Frank McDermott. And Frank McDermott hired a foreman. Actually, Davis hired this man before he sold the ranch. His name was Orville Burtis. Have you heard of the Burtis family? Orville was quite a character in himself. I don't know if you've heard any of the stories or not, and I won't tell too many of them. But he was more than just a foreman. He was almost like a partner, because he was allowed to run his own cattle as well as cattle belonging to both Davis and then McDermott. But he liked his tipple. I have a 12-page interview with Orville. The interview, I didn't conduct the interview, but whoever conducted it wrote it up verbatim. Makes interesting reading. Most of it contradicts itself. And the other I know to be wrong anyway. So, as I say, it's fun reading, but it doesn't give you much information. So the Burtises lived in the big house for about, I don't know, pretty close to 20 years. And there was a little house, and by the way, going back to Owen Dix, he had a house out on Konza, just a very small house, and we're having trouble right now deciding where that house was. It's pretty close to this area in here, but he may have been here and he may have been down here. There is a forsythia bush growing out of Kings Creek Bank, where the bank is about 20 feet tall. And I think that's where the Dix house used to sit. And the creek has come in and eroded it so that there's no level land there now. It's just a creek bank. The other place is just across from the big house. There is a stone foundation there. But that foundation couldn't possibly have been a house, in my opinion. Looks more like a storage shed or something. But anyway, Dix had a house there. Well, when the Hawkinsons finally gave up and sold out, there occurred a little bit of gossip about Carl's one daughter. Carl and his wife Anna had a daughter. Well, one of the open house days out here, I talked to a lady who said,